The smell hit Alex Reed before she even saw them. It was wrong somehow, not the usual mix of fuel and recycled air that greeted her at the docking bay. This smell was organic, desperate, like fear mixed with something she couldn't name. Her boots echoed against the metal walkway as she approached her ship, the Starwind. The old cargo freighter had been her home for 8 years, carrying supplies between the outer colonies and the main trade routes. Nothing fancy, nothing that would attract attention. Just honest work for honest pay. But today something was different. A soft whimpering sound came from near her airlock. Alex stopped, hand moving to the plasma cutter on her belt. Pirates, sometimes, tried to hide near docked ships waiting to slip aboard when the crew returned. She had learned to be careful. The sound came again. Higher pitch this time, almost like crying. Alex crept forward, staying in the shadows of the loading equipment. What she saw made her forget about pirates entirely. 3 small creatures huddled together in a makeshift nest made from torn fabric and insulation foam. They looked like tiny dragons from the old Earth stories, no bigger than house cats. Their scales were clear like crystal, shifting colors as they moved. Delicate wings, paper thin and folded tight against their bodies. Eyes that seemed to hold tiny stars. One of them looked up at her approach and made a sound that went straight to her heart. It was the sound of a baby asking for help in a language she didn't understand but somehow knew perfectly. Alex knelt down slowly, keeping her movements gentle. The creatures didn't run. They watched her with those strange, beautiful eyes and made soft, chirping noises. The smallest one, barely the size of her fist, crawled closer and touched her outstretched finger with a tiny paw. That quote S when she noticed the note. It was written on actual paper, not a data pad. The handwriting was shaky, done by someone whose hands were either very young or very frightened. The words were in standard Galactic, but the grammar was broken, like someone learning the language from old books. Please, it read. My children not safe here. Humans good with small ones, yes? They hungry. They scared. They only babies. I sorry I cannot stay. Thank you for kindness. Alex read it 3 times before the meaning really hit her. Someone had left these creatures at her door on purpose. Someone who knew she was human, who believed humans would help. She looked at the 3 babies again. They were clearly malnourished. Their scales, which should have been bright and clear, were dull and cloudy. The smallest one was shivering despite the station's controlled temperature. All 3 watched her with a mixture of hope and terror that made her chest tight. Hey there, little ones, she whispered, not caring if they understood her words. They seemed to respond to her tone, pressing closer together but not backing away. Someone left you here for me to find, didn't they? Alex had never seen creatures like these before. In 8 years of traveling the trade routes, she had encountered dozens of alien species, but these were different. There was an intelligence in their eyes that reminded her of human children, but ancient at the same time. The largest of the 3, about the size of a kitten, stretched out its neck and sniffed her hand. Its touch was warm, and when their skin made contact, Alex felt something she couldn't explain. Like an echo in her mind, full of sadness and loss and desperate hope. You're scared, she said softly. You don't know where your parent went. The creature's scales shifted to a deep blue color, and somehow Alex knew she was right. She gathered the makeshift nest carefully, surprised by how light the babies were. They didn't struggle as she lifted them, just curled up together and made those soft chirping sounds. The smallest one, the one that had touched her first, kept one tiny paw pressed against her wrist. Getting them aboard the Starwind without being seen was easier than she expected. The docking bay was mostly empty, and the few workers around were too busy with their own ships to notice one cargo captain carrying what looked like a bundle of old fabric. Once inside her ship, Alex set them down in her small living quarters and really looked at what she had found. The babies were beautiful in a way that made her think of jewels and stained glass windows. But they were also clearly sick. Their breathing was too fast, and when she offered them water, they drank like They hadn't had any in days. Food was a bigger problem. Alex had no idea what they ate. She tried offering them some of her ration bars, but they just sniffed politely and turned away. Fruit from her small supply got the same response. Even the protein paste that most alien species could digest didn't interest them. It was the smallest one that gave her the first clue. It crawled over to her workstation and began licking the mineral deposits that had built up around her tool cleaning station. Its scales brightened slightly after it ate the metallic dust. Minerals, Alex said to herself. You eat minerals. She spent the next hour grinding up various metal shavings and crystal fragments from her spare parts supply. The babies ate eagerly, and their scales began to show more color. The largest one's scales shifted from dull gray to pale gold. The middle child showed hints of green and silver. The smallest remained mostly blue, but a brighter, healthier blue. As they ate, Alex found herself studying them more carefully. Their movements were too coordinated, too purposeful for simple animals. When one found a particularly good piece of mineral, it would chirp to the others and push some toward them. They took turns drinking from the water dish she had given them, and the largest always made sure the smallest drank first. You're people, aren't you? Alex said quietly. Not pets, not animals, people. The largest one looked up at her and made a sound that seemed almost like agreement. Then it did something that made Alex's heart skip. It pointed one tiny claw at itself, then at the other two, then at her. The meaning was clear. We are us. You are you. We are together now. That night, Alex couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the note, about someone desperate enough to leave their children with a complete stranger, about how much trust it took to believe that a human would be kind to 3 lost babies. She had pulled up every database she could access, trying to identify what species the creatures belonged to, but the searches came up empty. Either they were from some remote world she had never heard of, or they were something much rarer than she had thought. The baby slept in a pile in the corner of her bunk, making soft humming sounds. Every so often one of them would chirp quietly, and the others would hum back. They were talking to each other in their sleep. Alex watched them and made a decision that would change everything. Whatever these creatures were, whoever had left them at her door, she was going to take care of them. She was going to keep them safe. She just hoped she was strong enough for whatever that meant. 3 weeks later, Alex's life had completely changed, and she was exhausted. The babies, whom she had named Hope, Star, and Echo, were growing at an incredible rate. Hope, the largest, was now the size of a small dog. Star, the middle child, had developed the most beautiful color patterns Alex had ever seen, swirls of green and silver that moved across her scales like flowing water. Echo, still the smallest but no longer tiny, had learned to climb anything vertical and had a habit of appearing in impossible places around the ship. They were also the most intelligent creatures Alex had ever encountered. It started with small things. Hope figured out how to open the food storage compartments within days of coming aboard. Star learned to operate the temperature controls, adjusting the climate to keep all 3 of them comfortable. Echo discovered that certain combinations of sounds would make the ship's computer respond, though thankfully he hadn't figured out any important commands yet. But it was more than just problem solving. They were communicating with each other in increasingly complex ways. Alex had started keeping a journal of their behaviors, and what she was seeing amazed her. They didn't just change colors randomly. The colors were language. When Hope's scales shifted to warm gold, the others would gather around her. When Star's scales rippled with blue patterns, it seemed to mean danger or worry. Echo's bright flashes of white appeared to be excitement or joy. Alex had spent hours in the ship's small library, searching through every biological and xenological database she could access. The closest matches were to ancient legends, stories about dragon-like beings who had supposedly lived among the stars long before humans ever left Earth. But those were myths. Stories told by children. Except these 3 babies looked exactly like the creatures in those old tales. The breakthrough came when Hope brought Alex a datapad. Not just any datapad, one Alex had never seen before. It was clearly alien-made with symbols that hurt her eyes to look at directly. Hope set it down carefully and touched one of the symbols with her claw dot. The device activated, projecting a holographic display that made Alex gasp. It showed a star map unlike any she had ever seen. Not just the physical locations of stars and planets, but something else. Streams of light connecting different systems, patterns that seemed to pulse. With Life. Star and Echo gathered around the display, making excited chirping sounds. They pointed at different parts of the map with their claws, and their scales shifted through rapid color changes. Alex realized they were having a conversation about what they were seeing. "This is important to you, isn't it?" Alex said softly. "This map means something." Hope looked at her and made a complex pattern of colors across her scales. Then she touched another symbol on the datapad. The display changed, showing images that made Alex's breath catch. They were pictures of creatures, like Hope, Star, and Echo, but fully grown. Magnificent beings the size of small ships with wings that could span buildings. They moved through space without protection, their scales glowing like small suns. In the images, they seemed to be tending to something, guiding ships through dangerous areas, helping with construction projects on space stations, standing watch over worlds. "Guardians," Alex whispered. "You were guardians." The images showed these beings working alongside dozens of different alien species. But in every picture, they were clearly the leaders. Not through force or intimidation, but through wisdom and gentle guidance. Other species looked to them for direction the way children look to parents. Then the images changed, showing scenes that made Alex's heart sink. The great dragon-like beings were fleeing, hiding, their numbers growing smaller. Ships with unfamiliar markings were hunting them. Worlds that had once welcomed them now showed empty skies. The last images were the most heartbreaking. Small groups of the creatures trying to hide their young, desperate parents making impossible choices. Alex saw scenes of babies being left in hidden places, parents saying goodbye to children they would never see again. "The Drakari," Alex said suddenly, remembering something from an old history class. "You're the Drakari." All three babies went completely still. Their scales shifted to the same deep blue color. The color Alex had learned meant sadness and loss. She had thought the Drakari were just another legend, like the ancient stories about wise dragons who had once guided the galaxy toward peace. According to the few historical records that existed, they had vanished 300 years ago, just as the current Galactic Confederation was forming. But the official records said they had died from a plague. These images told a very different story. "Someone was hunting you," Alex said, kneeling down beside the three younglings. "That's why you disappeared. That's why someone left you at my door." Hope crawled into Alex's lap, something she had never done before. Her scales were the deep blue of grief, but when Alex stroked her head gently, flashes of gold began to appear. Trust, Alex realized. Hope was telling her she trusted her. Over the following days, Alex began to understand more about her unexpected passengers. They were incredibly intelligent, but not just in the way a smart animal might be. They understood abstract concepts, they planned for the future, and they remembered their past with clarity that amazed her. They also began teaching her their color language, showing her how different combinations meant different things. Simple concepts at first: hunger, thirst, happiness, fear. But gradually more complex ideas. Hope could now tell her that she missed her parent but was grateful to be safe. Star could explain that she was worried about others of their kind who might still be hiding. Echo, who was the most playful, could ask Alex to tell her stories about human space travel. In return, Alex taught them about human customs. They learned to eat at regular mealtimes, though their diet still consisted mainly of processed minerals that Alex had to special order from mining supply companies. They learned to respect Alex's sleep schedule, though they often curled up next to her bunk, humming their strange lullabies. Most importantly, they learned to hide when other people were around. Alex had made it clear that they needed to stay secret, and they understood the danger even if they didn't like it. But keeping them secret was becoming harder every day. They were growing so fast that Alex had to reconfigure her living space weekly. Hope was now too large to fit in the small bed Alex had made for them, and Star's wingspan required more room than the cargo hold could easily provide. Echo had learned to phase in and out of solid matter, something Alex hadn't known was possible, which made keeping track of him nearly impossible. More concerning were the questions Alex was starting to get from other ship captains and station authorities. Her mineral orders were unusual enough to attract attention. Her extended stays in deep space, avoiding the major trade routes, were noticed by the shipping companies that hired her. Someone had filed a report about strange sounds coming from her ship during her last docking. Alex knew she needed help, but she had no idea who she could trust. The Drakari had been hunted to near extinction once. If the wrong people learned that 3 survivors were aboard her ship, Alex was certain the same thing would happen again. The decision was made for her when she returned to her ship after a supply run to find Hope, Star, and Echo huddled together in the corner, their scales flashing bright warning colors. "What's wrong?" Alex asked, but she already knew. Someone had been aboard her ship while she was gone. Someone had seen them. Echo, the youngest, crawled over to her and pressed his small head against her hand. His scales showed patterns Alex had never seen before, complex swirls of red and black that somehow conveyed both terror and determination. He was telling her they needed to run. Alex looked at her 3 charges, these beautiful, intelligent beings who had become her family, and made another life-changing decision. She activated the ship's engines and began the departure sequence without requesting clearance from station control. As the Starwind pulled away from the docking bay, Alex knew there was no going back. She was no longer just Alex Reed, cargo hauler. She was now Alex Reed, guardian of the last 3 Drakari in the known galaxy. She just hoped she could keep them alive long enough to figure out what that really meant. The truth was worse than Alex had imagined, and she discovered it in the most horrible way possible. 2 months after fleeing the station, Alex made the mistake of trying to access a public information terminal at a remote trading post. She had been careful, using false identification and staying away from the main galactic networks. But she needed to understand what was happening, why Confederation ships seemed to be appearing wherever she went. What she found in the restricted databases made her physically sick. The Drakari hadn't died from a plague 300 years ago. They had been systematically hunted by something called the Harvest Protocol. Alex stared at the classified documents, her hands shaking as she read report after report, detailing the capture, study, and eventual extermination of beings she now knew were people. According to the files, Drakari neural tissue could extend the lifespan of other species by centuries. Their crystalline scales, when properly processed, could enhance cognitive abilities far beyond natural limits. Most valuable of all was something called their empathic core, an organ that could be transplanted into other beings, giving them the ability to influence emotions and thoughts on a massive scale. The Confederation had built its power on the bodies of the Drakari. Alex read about the final years of the genocide, when desperate Drakari parents had hidden their children across the galaxy hoping some might survive. The Confederation had sent out special units called Purity Squads to track down these hidden survivors. According to the records, the last confirmed Drakari had been captured and processed 15 years ago. But Alex knew better now. Some had survived, living in hiding for centuries, protecting their young until they couldn't anymore. The parent who had left Hope, Star, and Echo at her door had probably died within days of that desperate act of trust. Alex was still processing this information when alarms began blaring throughout the trading post. Confederation warships were approaching, and all civilian vessels were ordered to prepare for inspection. She ran back to the Starwind, her mind racing. Hope, Star, and Echo were waiting in the cargo hold, and all 3 immediately sensed her distress. Their scales shifted to worried blues and grays as she activated the ship's systems. "We have to leave," Alex said, not bothering to hide her fear anymore. "Right now." But it was too late. As the Starwind lifted off, 3 Confederation cruisers dropped out of hyperspace directly in front of them. Alex found herself face to face with ships that could reduce her freighter to atoms in seconds. Cargo vessel Starwind, you are ordered to return to the trading post for mandatory inspection. Came the transmission from the lead cruiser. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. Alex looked at her 3 charges. Hope had grown to the size of a large horse, her golden scales now capable of producing actual light when she was stressed. Star had developed the ability to interface directly with the ship's computer systems, her consciousness somehow merging with the electronic networks. Echo, still the smallest but now as large as a big cat, could phase in and out of visible reality at will. They were no longer babies. They were becoming something magnificent and powerful. And the Confederation wanted to kill them for it. Hold on, Alex said, and pushed the engines far beyond their safety limits. What followed was the most terrifying week of Alex's life. The Confederation ships were faster and better armed, but the Starwind had something they didn't expect. 3 Drakari, who were learning to use abilities that had been dormant for centuries. Hope discovered she could project false sensor readings, making the ship appear to be in one location while actually being somewhere completely different. Star learned to hack into enemy computer systems, causing their navigation to malfunction at crucial moments. Echo developed the ability to make the entire ship temporarily invisible to both visual and electronic detection. But they were still running, always running, and Alex could see the strain it was putting on all of them. The younglings were using powers they didn't fully understand, pushing themselves to exhaustion to keep them all alive. Alex herself was running on stimulants and determination, snatching a few hours of sleep when she could while jumping from system to system. It was during one of these brief rest stops that Alex discovered something that changed everything. She was checking on the 3 Drakari, who had curled up together in the cargo hold, when Echo suddenly looked up at her with an expression of pure terror. His scales flashed patterns Alex had never seen before, chaotic swirls of color that seemed to convey images directly into her mind. She saw flashes of ships, people in uniforms, weapons being prepared. But more than that, she felt what Echo was feeling. The fear wasn't just for himself or his siblings. It was for her. You can see the future, Alex whispered, and Echo's scales confirmed it with a flash of gold. Star lifted her head, and suddenly, Alex's mind was filled with voices, communications being transmitted between Confederation ships, tactical discussions about the best way to capture their prey alive. Star was somehow listening to enemy transmissions across multiple star systems. Hope raised her great head and looked directly into Alex's eyes. When their gazes met, Alex felt something she had never experienced before. She could sense Hope's emotions as clearly as her own, could feel the love and gratitude and fierce protectiveness that filled the young Drakari's heart. But more than that, she could feel other things. Memories that weren't her own began flowing through her mind. Images of the Drakari as they had once been. Not just guardians, but something far more important. They had been the galaxy's conscience, able to sense and nurture the capacity for compassion in other species. Their extinction hadn't just been a tragedy. It had been a catastrophe that had left the entire galaxy morally adrift. Without the Drakari's gentle influence, species had become more aggressive, more selfish, more willing to accept cruelty as normal. The Confederation's rise to power had only been possible because there was no one left to remind the galaxy what kindness looked like. You're not just people, Alex said, understanding flooding through her. You're hope. You're literally hope. For everyone. All 3 Drakari moved closer to her, and Alex felt the full weight of their trust. They had chosen her, a human cargo hauler with no special training or abilities, to be their protector. But more than that, they had chosen humanity itself. In the shared memories flowing between them. Alex saw why. Humans were one of the few species that had never directly participated in the Drakari genocide. They had been too young as a spacefaring race, too isolated on the galaxy's outer rim. More importantly, humans had something the Drakari recognized and valued: the ability to care for others even when it brought no benefit to themselves. The parent who had left these 3 at Alex's door hadn't chosen her randomly. They had chosen her because they knew humans would fight for the helpless, even against impossible odds. "They're going to keep coming," Alex said, thinking about the Confederation ships that were undoubtedly tracking them even now. "They'll never stop hunting you." Hope's response came not in colors but in feelings transmitted directly into Alex's mind. She felt determination, courage, and something else. A willingness to sacrifice everything to protect what mattered most. Star quote, S scales rippled with silver patterns, and suddenly Alex understood what they were trying to tell her. The time for hiding was over. If the Confederation wanted to finish what they had started 300 years ago, they would have to go through humanity first. Echo, the youngest, crawled into Alex's lap, despite now being too large for such gestures. His scales showed patterns of absolute trust as he pressed his head against her chest. Alex could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, and his complete faith that she would find a way to keep them all safe. Alex looked at her 3 charges, these beautiful beings who represented the last hope for galactic peace and made the hardest decision of her life. She activated the ship's long-range transmitter and began composing a message that would change everything. She was going to tell the galaxy the truth about the Drakari. She was going to expose the Confederation's crimes. And she was going to make sure that anyone who wanted to harm her family would have to answer to every decent being in known space. The Starwind's engines hummed as they prepared for one final jump. Alex didn't know if they would survive what was coming, but she knew one thing for certain: Hope, Star, and Echo would not die in hiding. If this was the end, they would face it together with courage and dignity. And maybe, just maybe, the galaxy would finally remember what it meant to choose compassion over cruelty. The hunt was about to become something the Confederation had never expected, a war for the soul of civilization itself. The silence between star systems had never felt so heavy. Alex floated in the pilot's chair of the Starwind, watching the deep space scanner for any sign of pursuit. They had been running for 4 months now, jumping from system to system, never staying anywhere long enough to feel safe. Her ship, once a simple cargo hauler, had become something else entirely. Part home, part fortress, part sanctuary for the 3 most wanted beings in the galaxy. Hope, Star, and Echo were no longer the tiny creatures she had found beside her airlock. Hope now filled most of the cargo bay when she stretched to her full length, her golden scales bright enough to read by. Star had become something even more remarkable. Her consciousness seemed to exist as much in the ship's computer systems as in her physical body, her silver and green patterns flowing like living circuits across her hide. Echo, still the smallest but now the size of a small shuttle, could slip between dimensions in ways that made Alex's head hurt to think about. But the most dramatic change wasn't in their size or abilities. It was in the bond they shared with Alex herself. It had started small. Brief flashes of emotion when they touched, moments when Alex could sense what they were feeling. But as the weeks passed, the connection grew stronger. Now Alex could feel their thoughts as clearly as her own, could experience their memories of a species and culture that had been lost for centuries. Through Hope's memories, Alex learned what the galaxy had been like when the Drakari were still alive. She saw worlds where different species worked together not because they had to, but because it felt right. She experienced the gentle influence the Drakari had provided, not control or manipulation, but a kind of emotional guidance that helped other beings find their better natures. S memories were different, filled with vast libraries of knowledge that the Drakari had maintained across the centuries. Alex found herself understanding concepts of science and philosophy that should have been far beyond her education. She could see patterns in space and time that revealed the deep connections between all living things. Echo S memories were the most painful, because they were the most recent. Through his young mind, Alex experienced the final years of the genocide, the fear, the desperate attempts to hide, the gradual realization that their species was dying. She felt the grief of parents who had to choose between keeping their children with them and giving them a chance to live. But the memories flowed both ways. Hope, Star, and Echo were learning about humanity through Alex's experiences, and what they discovered amazed them. They saw a species that could be petty and selfish, yes, but also capable of incredible kindness towards strangers. They learned about human concepts like adoption and found family, about the way humans could choose to love someone who wasn't related to them by blood. Most importantly, they learned about human stubbornness, the absolute refusal to give up when something really mattered. "You're planning something," Alex said one day as she watched Hope manipulating holographic displays with her claws. The young Drakari had been working on the same set of calculations for hours, her scales showing the deep concentration patterns. Alex had learned to recognize Hope's response came not in words but in images projected directly into Alex's mind. She saw star charts overlaid with historical data, tracking the movements of Confederation fleets over the past 3 centuries. But more than that, she saw something else. Other signals, faint traces that might indicate Drakari survivors still hiding throughout the galaxy. "You think there are others," Alex said, understanding flooding through her. "Not many, but some." Star's consciousness brushed against Alex's thoughts, confirming the possibility. Through their shared link, Alex felt Star's analysis of communication patterns, energy signatures that were almost but not quite like standard galactic technology. Signs that some Drakari had not just survived, but had been watching and waiting. Echo materialized beside Alex's chair, his scales showing patterns of hope and determination. Through their bond, Alex felt his certainty that others of his kind were still alive, still protecting their young, still preparing for the day when they might emerge from hiding. But they're waiting for a signal, Alex realized. Something to tell them it's safe to reveal themselves. All 3 Drakari confirmed this with synchronized flashes of golden light. They had been preparing for something far more important than just escaping the Confederation. They were preparing to call their scattered people home. The plan they showed her was breathtaking in its scope and audacity. Using Star's ability to interface with galactic communication networks and Echo's power to phase through security barriers, they could transmit a message to every system in known space simultaneously. Not just to the hidden Drakari, but to everyone. Every species, every government, every individual who might still remember what the galaxy had lost. Hope's role would be the most dangerous. She would have to project not just images or words but emotions themselves. She would make every being who received the message feel what the Drakari could offer. The peace, the wisdom, the gentle guidance that could help heal centuries of growing cruelty and conflict. "It's going to bring every Confederation ship in the galaxy down on us," Alex said, though she already knew she was going to help them do it anyway. The 3 Drakari moved closer to her, their scales showing patterns Alex had learned meant family, trust, love. Through their shared bond, she felt their complete faith in her ability to protect them long enough for the message to reach its destination. But Alex also felt something else, their willingness to sacrifice themselves if necessary. They understood that this might be their only chance to save what remained of their species and restore what the galaxy had lost. They were prepared to die for it. "Not without a fight," Alex said firmly, and began planning the most impossible battle of her life. They chose a system on the edge of Confederation space, far enough from major colonies to avoid civilian casualties, but close enough to major trade routes that the message would spread quickly. An old mining colony that had been abandoned for decades provided the perfect staging ground. As they prepared for what might be their final stand, Alex found herself amazed by how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been a simple cargo hauler with no family and no real purpose. Now she was the adopted mother of 3 beings who might save the galaxy. And she couldn't imagine any other life. Hope had taken to sleeping curled around Alex's bunk, her massive form providing both warmth and protection. Star spent most of her time merged with the ship's systems, turning the old freighter into something that could rival military vessels. Echo practiced phasing in and out of reality, preparing for the role he would play in the coming battle. And Alex practiced being brave enough to stand between her family and anyone who would harm them. The night before they reached the abandoned colony, Alex sat in the cargo bay with all 3 Drakari, sharing what might be their last peaceful moment together. She felt their love flowing through the bond they shared, their gratitude for the human who had chosen to protect them when no one else would. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Alex said softly, I want you to know that finding you three was the best thing that ever happened to me. You're not just passengers or refugees. You're my children, and I'm proud of what you're about to do." Hope, Star, and Echo pressed close to her, their scales showing every color of love and determination. Through their shared bond, Alex felt their promise. Whatever the cost, they would not let her sacrifice be meaningless. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn that the Drakari had returned, and anyone who wanted to silence them forever would have to go through one very stubborn human first. Alex smiled as she felt sleep finally claiming her. She had never been a hero before, but she was about to become one whether she wanted to or not. And she was ready. The abandoned mining colony looked like a graveyard of broken dreams when the star wind settled onto the cracked landing pad. Alex had chosen this place because it reminded her of something important, that civilizations could die when good people stopped caring about what happened to others. The empty buildings and rusted equipment were a monument to greed and short-sightedness, the perfect place to make a stand for something better. Hope, Star, and Echo moved through the colony with purpose, each preparing for their role in what was about to happen. Star merged her consciousness with the colony's old communication array, bringing systems back online that had been dead for decades. Her silver-green scales flowed like liquid metal across the equipment as she transformed primitive mining communications into something that could reach every corner of the galaxy. Echo phased between dimensions, setting up the quantum resonance fields they would need to punch their signal through the Confederation's blocking networks. Alex couldn't see him when he was working, but she could feel his presence through their bond. Determined, focused, ready. Hope stood at the center of it all, her golden scales now blazing with inner light. She had grown beyond anything Alex could have imagined when she first found three tiny creatures by her airlock. Hope was magnificent, beautiful in a way that made Alex think of living stars, but there was sadness in her great eyes. She knew what this would cost. "They're coming," Alex said, checking the long-range scanners. "Confederation fleet, 12 ships. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Through their shared bond, Alex felt her three children's resolve. They were ready. More than ready. They were eager to finally stop running and show the galaxy what they really were. "Remember," Alex said, checking her weapon for the 100th time, "you don't fight until the message is sent. No matter what happens to me, you wait until every being in known space knows the truth." Hope's massive head turned toward her, and Alex felt a wave of love so strong it nearly brought her to tears. Star's voice echoed through the communication. "Systems, we will not let you stand alone." Echo materialized beside her, his scales showing patterns that meant family, protection, forever. "You won't have to," Alex replied and activated the colony's automated defense systems. They were old and barely functional, but they would buy precious minutes. The Confederation ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, sleek and deadly against the stars. Alex recognized the lead vessel, the Righteous Fury, flagship of Admiral Carson, the man who had personally overseen the final stages of the Drakari genocide decades ago. "This is Admiral Carson of the Confederation fleet," came the transmission. "Alex Reed, you are ordered to surrender the specimens immediately. You have 60 seconds to comply before we begin bombardment." Alex keyed her own transmitter. "This is Alex Reed, captain of the Starwind. Those aren't specimens, Admiral, they're people, and if you want them, you're going to have to go through me." She felt Hope, Star, and Echo's pride flowing through their bond, their amazement that this human would face down a fleet for their sake. But Alex also felt their fear, not for themselves, but for her. The first missiles began falling before Carson even bothered to respond. Alex threw herself behind cover as the ground around the communication array exploded. The colony's defenses fired back, ancient plasma cannons sending streams of energy toward the Confederation ships. It was like throwing stones at a hurricane, but it was all she had. "Signal ready," Star announced through the damaged speakers. "Beginning transmission in 30 seconds. A landing shuttle screamed through the atmosphere, disgorging troops in full battle armor. Alex counted at least 50 soldiers, all armed with weapons designed to capture rather than kill. The Confederation wanted the Drakari alive for harvesting. Not going to happen, Alex muttered, and opened fire. The battle was chaos. Alex had never been a soldier, just a cargo hauler who had learned to shoot well enough to discourage pirates. But she fought like someone with everything to lose, and that made all the difference. She used every trick she had learned in 8 years of dangerous cargo runs, every dirty tactic that had ever kept her alive. Meanwhile, Commissar's consciousness flowed through galactic communication networks like lightning, seizing control of every transmission system within 1,000 light-years. Echo phased through solid matter, appearing behind enemy soldiers to disable their equipment before vanishing again. Dot and Hope began to sing. It wasn't a sound that could be heard with ears. It was something deeper, a harmony that touched the soul, directly. Through their bond, Alex felt what Hope was projecting, not just to the hidden Drakari scattered across the galaxy, but to every living being capable of receiving the transmission. She was projecting the memory of peace, the feeling of what the galaxy had been like when compassion was stronger than greed, when different species worked together because they chose to, rather than because they were forced to. She was showing everyone what they had lost. When the Drakari died, the effect on the Confederation soldiers was immediate and devastating. Alex watched as hardened troops stopped firing, their weapons falling from hands that shook with the weight of understanding. They were feeling, perhaps for the first time in their lives, the true cost of the orders they had followed. The civilians who had died, the families destroyed, the children left orphaned. It all came crashing down on them at once. Several soldiers simply sat down and began to cry. But Admiral Carson was made of sterner stuff, and the empathic projection couldn't reach him aboard his ship. All units fall back to minimum safe distance. Prepare for orbital bombardment. If we can't take them alive, we'll make sure no one else can have them either. Alex felt her heart sink as the ground troops retreated and the ships above began charging their main weapons. Hope's song was reaching across the galaxy. Star's message was spreading through every communication network, but they were going to die before anyone could respond. That's when Echo did something impossible. The youngest of the 3 Drakari suddenly expanded his phasing ability beyond anything Alex had seen before. Instead of just shifting between dimensions himself, he wrapped the entire colony in a quantum field that put them slightly out of phase with normal space. The orbital bombardment passed through them harmlessly, the energy blasts hitting nothing but empty air where solid matter should have been. Echo, Alex called, seeing the strain the effort was putting on him. His scales were flickering between colors rapidly, and she could feel his exhaustion through their bond. Can't hold it much longer, Echo gasped, his young voice strained. To the breaking point. That's when the first response to their message arrived. A ship dropped out of hyperspace near the edge of the system, then another, then a dozen more. But these weren't Confederation vessels. They were civilian ships, cargo haulers and passenger transports and mining vessels, all converging on the colony. Star's consciousness touched Alex's mind, sharing what she was receiving from the galactic communication networks. The message was spreading faster than anyone had expected. Beings across the galaxy were learning the truth about the Drakari genocide, about what their species had represented, about what the galaxy had lost. More importantly, they were feeling Hope's empathic projection, experiencing firsthand what peace and compassion could feel like. The response was overwhelming. "Admiral," came a transmission from one of the approaching civilian ships. "This is Captain Torres of the Free Trader Horizon. We're here to escort the Drakari survivors to safety. Stand down your weapons." "This is Confederation space," Carson replied. "You have no authority here." "This is Captain Kim of the transport New Soul," came another voice. "We're not claiming authority. We're claiming responsibility. These beings are under our protection now." More ships arrived every minute, not just humans, but representatives of dozens of species who had received the message and felt Hope's call to their better natures. They formed a protective barrier around the colony, their combined shields creating an impenetrable wall. Admiral Carson found himself facing not just 3 young Drakari and 1 stubborn human, but a spontaneous alliance of every being in the galaxy who still remembered what kindness looked like. You can't protect them forever, Carson transmitted, to the growing fleet. The Confederation will not allow this. The response came not from any single ship, but from all of them at once. Try us. Alex felt tears running down her face as she watched ship after ship arrive to stand between her family and those who would harm them. Hope's empathic projection was still flowing across the galaxy, but now it was being answered. Other voices were joining the song, adding their own commitment to building something better. Through STAR's connection to the communication networks, Alex heard reports from across known space. Planets were declaring independence from the Confederation. Military units were refusing orders. The carefully maintained system of control that had ruled the galaxy for 3 centuries was cracking under the weight of simple compassion. And then the real miracle happened. From the far edge of the system, moving with grace that took Alex's breath away, came ships unlike any she had ever seen. They moved like living things flowing through space with organic curves and surfaces that seemed to glow with inner light. Hope, Alex whispered. Are those? Hope's scales blazed with pure joy as she confirmed what Alex had hardly dared to believe. The hidden Drakari were emerging from centuries of concealment, drawn by their children's call and protected by the fleet of beings who had chosen compassion over fear. The first of the adult Drakari ships settled onto the colony's landing pad, with impossible gentleness. When the airlock opened, Alex saw her first adult Drakari, a being of such beauty and dignity that she fell to her knees without conscious thought. But the ancient creature ignored protocol and majesty, flowing across the ground to where Hope, Star, and Echo waited. The reunion was beyond words, a harmony of colors and emotions that filled Alex's heart to bursting. When the adult Drakari finally turned to Alex, she felt a presence touch her mind with gratitude so profound it changed her forever. Thank you, the ancient voice whispered in her thoughts, for keeping hope alive when all seemed lost. Alex looked around at the fleet of ships that had come to protect 3 young creatures they had never met. At the report Star was sharing of worlds choosing peace over war. At Hope, Star, and Echo, surrounded by their returned people. I think, Alex said softly, Hope was keeping me alive too. The galaxy would never be the same. The Confederation's reign of fear was ending, brought down not by weapons or politics, but by 3 young Drakari and 1 human who had refused to let cruelty have the final word. And at the center of it all, Alex Reed, former cargo hauler, now the human who had helped save the soul of civilization, watched her children come home at last.